Thanks, everyone. Nice to be here. I'm going to speak about a project that we're developing in the Queen West area called The Plant. It's a mid-rise building, 10-story building with a significant mixed-use component. 25% of the building is actually commercial usage. So the total building is about 100,000 square feet. 25,000 square feet is commercial use. The idea of The Plant is actually a pun that is both plant as in the green things that grow, but also plant as being old factories. Because this area was formerly an industrial zone. This particular site was originally the site of the Flet's Bakery. She ended up moving to Etobicoke, to a larger premises, and we redeveloped the site with a new building, but wanted to retain employment uses on the site. So rather than just simply replace the employment use with residential, we had a no net loss approach to the employment uses and kept 25,000 square feet of employment uses, being retail and office, on the site, and then added 8 stories of residential above. The building was designed by Co-Engineer Architects and SMV, now known as CSV, I believe, and Blackwell Engineering, I should mention, was the structural engineer. They're one of the sponsors today, so a nod to them. M&E was Smith & Anderson, and the landscape architect was Scott Torrance, who is now Forek. What we followed on this project was the One Planet Living framework. You may be familiar with the LEED framework of sustainability. One Planet Living is a more complete and comprehensive sustainability framework, which we used as our sort of design guide and sustainability framework for the project. We did not get the project endorsed by One Planet Living. It's a very complex process that we've used on some of our larger scale community scale projects. But for a single building, we just used it as our guide, but we didn't seek endorsement from them. One Planet Living is basically a sustainability framework that deals both with environmental as well as social sustainability, and is based on 10 principles. And I'll just briefly run through them. Health and happiness, well-being, equity and local economy, culture and community, land use and wildlife, sustainable water, local and sustainable food, sustainable materials, sustainable transport, zero waste and zero carbon. So these are the 10 goals of the One Planet Living framework. It's based on the premise that if everyone in the world lived like we live, we would need 4 planets to support us, and clearly we only have 1. So it's about living within our means. What we focused on in this project, and I could spend hours talking about how we tried to satisfy each of these components, but we took local and sustainable food as a bit of a theme, and focused on urban agriculture in the project. So there's a very strong focus on healthy living, on a terrace-to-table approach. This is the amenity space on the 3rd floor of the building, which is a communal kitchen where people can have dinners together, have cooking classes. There's a south-facing glazed wall where people can get their gardens started early in the season, and there's communal gardens on the podium roof, in addition to oversized balconies on all the residential levels. I mention all this because it's really part of this sort of ecology of the whole building to create a vertical village in the city that has both a very vibrant and livable residential component, as well as a very synergistic commercial component at the base. So that is a rendering of the building. This is all new construction. There's no urban taxidermy here, I'm proud to say. The lower podium is the commercial component, retail at grade with office above, and recalls the sort of scale of Main Street buildings in that it's a 2-story component, and it also ties into the residential area to the east of the site. Most of the buildings are of the same height as the podium. The residential component is set way back, creating a large green area on the roof, podium area where the communal gardens are, and as I mentioned, the balconies are all oversized, again, to encourage people to do their own growing. So there's a real focus on healthy living, and then we tried to take that kind of urban agriculture, healthy living approach to how we curate the retail component at grade in the office. So we are deliberately seeking out local retailers, small independent retailers that focus on a healthy living theme, be they food uses, plant stores, bicycle shops, etc. We're just at the early stages of leasing now We've leased one of the spaces to a fitness group, but we've not yet leased up the space. So it's just under construction now. It's on the 3rd floor, and we expect the building to be finished at the end of this year. So I'm going to talk about factors that I think makes for successful retail space: location, design, market, and the financial terms. And I'll use this building as a bit of a case study to describe how we sort of responded to these factors in designing the building. Location, obviously very critical in any retail environment. You need a high traffic area. Retail follows residential, not the other way around. So you need a strong residential population, population density close by, and it's very helpful to co-locate retail. In other words, retail that's just on one side of the street with residential on the other is less successful. The more retail bunches together, as it were, the better it will be. Visibility is obviously very important. We had some challenges on this site that I'll get into in a minute, but we were very fortunate to be on the meeting point of the West Toronto rail path and the urban bike lanes of Adelaide and Richmond Street. So you may be familiar with the West Toronto rail path. It currently ends at Dundas from the junction, but it's going to extend all the way down to Sudbury Street and meet the urban grid right outside our door. So we're very excited by that. So for us, it wasn't so much about car access and parking, but more about bicycle access and transit access. We're also, there's going to be a new smart track station right across the street. So this is an aerial view of the property. You can see in red where it's located. It's at the foot of Dovercourt Street, right where Dovercourt Street kind of turns into Sudbury, midway between Queen Street and King Street. So Queen and King are both very established retail streets, Queen more so than King. But we were somewhat challenged in being in an area that didn't have an existing retail base, but we were still committed to providing retail on the street as well as office. We are also challenged by the fact that the railway line goes right south of the property. So rather than having a full circle of residential as our sort of radius, we really had a semicircle because we were up against this railway line, which was a barrier to bringing people to the site. We were fortunate, though, that along this railway line is, in fact, the bicycle path, so it's not a complete barrier. We were fortunate also that because of the smart track station, there's now going to be a bridge across the railway tracks to Liberty Village. So rather than being a barrier, it actually becomes an advantage to us. But still, it's not in an established retail area. So we really had to work hard to create a sort of ecology that would support the future retail. We adopted an approach that would focus on neighborhood uses, on service uses, and created a vertical village really on the site. So in terms of design, important things for retail are visibility, signage, the nature of the indoor space, the nature of the outdoor space, and servicing requirements. On this particular site, we were very conscious of ceiling height. You'll note in a lot of new residential buildings in the city, the retail tends to be a forgotten part of the project. The ceiling heights are quite low. And not a lot of thought has been given to the space, the retail space. Most residential developers just focus on the residential. Retail's what's left over on the ground floor. We took a different approach and actually consciously tried to design retail space that worked with high ceilings, with minimal structure coming down, so there was flexibility in planning. So shear walls don't go all the way down into the retail space, but rather there's transfer beams so that we come down to a column structure in the building. There's generous outdoor space, so if a cafe comes in and wants outdoor seating, there's room for that. And we're very conscious of proper servicing and loading, and I'll show you a floor plan later as to how that worked. In order to not have the retail just dependent on the residential around the area, there is a significant residential population, but we thought that by adding the office on the second floor, we would create activity all day long. So office tenants on the second floor can patronize the cafe, can do the shopping, etc. So rather than just depending on residents, which are there in the evening and weekends, it's really more of an all-day event. So thinking about how you create that kind of a market is very important. In terms of demographics, retailers always look at the demographics of an area and who their market is. In our case, there's a lot of density just to the west of the site with a lot of millennials living there, so that's obviously a big focus, will be a big focus of how to position the retail. Synergies are very important. Again, if we don't have a huge retail node around us, so we had to create the node ourselves. And with the shift to online shopping, one has to be very careful about what kind of retail exists. I mean, if you're just simply providing a commodity, that can obviously be bought online cheaper and more conveniently. So stores that just sell goods are challenged in this environment and will be more so. So it's really about focusing on services, on things that you can't get online. You can't get a haircut online, for example. The experience of shopping, having whatever that retail is, should give people an experience and be more than just simply purchasing a commodity. And right-sizing the space. So large retail spaces are going to be more challenged as we go forward, again, because of the competition with online shopping. Our offices at Spadina and Richmond, and around the corner there's a little cafe that's the size of a closet. It's the smallest, I guess, cafe I've ever seen. Basically, it has room for the person to stand there, and he serves people out on the street. So that's right-sizing down to an extreme. But my point being that smaller retail stores really are easier to support because they're less costly to maintain. In terms of financial terms, retailers are very concerned about keeping their costs affordable, obviously, and they're looking at three things. They're looking at the net rent they pay, which is what they pay to the landlord, the additional rent they pay, which is all the flow-through costs, the also called TMI, taxes, maintenance, and insurance, and that includes property taxes. We'll hear more about that later, but with property taxes are a real key in keeping retail affordable. And then there's a gross-up factor. So in a multi-tenant environment, one also has to gross up for common areas. This is a rendering of our lobby in the building, which serves the residential floors as well as the upper floors. And so that space is basically grossed up into the net rent that the tenants will have in their leases. And that, in a way, puts these spaces at a bit of a disadvantage in competing with traditional retail that's standalone. And finally, retailers are very concerned about their lease term. So retailers want to know that they've got a 5-year term, a 10-year term, and renewal options so that they can invest in their business and they can be there in the long term. One of the real challenges is when landlords reduce tenants' rent to a very short period of time, and that's kind of the beginning of a downward spiral because they can't plan for the future. Very quickly, this is the floor plan. So we're at the corner of Dover Court and Sudbury Street. North is to the left here. So we've focused all the retail space, obviously, on the main street. We've set it back there's a fairly generous boulevard on the Dover Court side, so hopefully the retail will spill out on the street. You can see that there's column structure inside, not shear walls, so there's a lot of flexibility. We could have as many as 6 or 7 retail stores here. We don't know how many we will have in the end. It will be a function of who comes along and who we lease to. There was one mention earlier on about the plague of very large frontages on streets, and that's clearly an issue that we would like to avoid. The one large tenant that we have so far, we actually put in a T-shape. So basically, we put the bigger space at the back and gave him a very small frontage at the front. This is the fitness group. So to maintain narrow frontages for retail, because we clearly want to activate the street as much as we can and keep it lively. Loading is all at the back. There's a common loading dock with the residential and a service corridor at the back as well. So again, the ceiling heights are quite high. They're about 13 feet. So we've designed this to be very airy and open and will hopefully be an attractive space for retailers. This is a plan of the second floor. So again, you can see it's a very open office space. And again, we put the office in here to basically add to the ecology of the site, to have multiple uses, and to encourage daytime use of the building as well as evening use. So this is, again, just a sort of a final shot of the building. You see the retail at grade. Signage, obviously, is very important. Signage is a challenge because you don't want to sort of junk up the facade, for lack of a better word. But on the other hand, retailers need very visible and readable signage from the street, which interestingly we're not showing in this rendering. On the second floor you can see is the office, again the two-story podium and the residential set way back. So again, our goal was to create a sort of a vertical village in the city. It's focused on urban agriculture, on healthy living, and we're hoping to find tenants, both office and retail, that will kind of reinforce that and create a real local hub and a neighborhood focus in that part of the city. Thank you very much.